Hi everyone, welcome to Haftarah Halfhour. This is kind of a bonus round in that it's a traditional, the kind of the cycle of Haftarah is sometimes offset on specific dates, and we've Joshua Neely here, of course, and he's going to tell us a little bit about why that happens and why we're reading what we're reading now this week. You'll also be able to find our traditional portion for this week online as well if you want to do both, which you should. Rabbi Neely.
So Shabbat Shekalim is the Shabbat that is read in a build-up towards the big cycles of holidays that are going to start flowing out. The most notable coming up soon is Purim. And that's kind of the trigger for when we're reading Shabbat Shekalim. And Shabbat Shekalim was meant to be a reminder of the money that was collected during the Mishkan construction in the wilderness, which is why there's a special Torah reading that goes along with this. Instead of counting the people one by one, the people donated a half-shekel coin each, and then all you had to do was count the coins, and you knew how many people there were. And there are lots of different reasons of why that took place. But Shabbat Shekalim's Haftarah carries on with that same theme of the money that is being donated by the people. And it's going to look at a very particular issue of that donation, a certain problem that crops up, and how it was resolved in the ancient world.
We are in 2 Kings 11:17 through 12:17. The text will be on your screens, and we're starting here in verse 17, chapter 11. And Jehoiada solemnized the covenant between the Lord on the one hand, and the king and the people on the other, as well as between the king and the people, that they should be the people of the Lord. Thereupon all the people of the land went to the temple of Baal. They tore it down and smashed its altars and images to bits. And they slew Matan, the priest of Baal, in front of the altars. Jehoiada, the priest, then placed guards all over the house of the Lord. Was that in case of retribution?
Oh, well, you just smashed one people's temple. What do you think they're likely to want to do in return?
He took the chiefs of hundreds, the Karaites.
Mm-hmm. No connection to the later Karaites of medieval times.
The guards and all the people of the land, and they escorted the king from the house of the Lord into the royal palace by the gate of the guards. And he ascended the royal throne. All the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet. As for Atalia, she had been put to the sword in the royal palace.
All right, so we're dealing here with kind of the restorative coup. Well, coup may be too strong of a word. They're trying to restore the proper focus of the people on God with the new king, who we're going to hear a lot more in the next chapter, and that means getting rid of Queen Atalia, who had been perverting the worship, and therefore Baal gets torn down.
Again, that Baal. From chapter 12. Jehoash was 7 years old when he became king. Jehoash began his reign in the 7th year of Yehu. Can you explain to me what that means?
And he becomes king in the 7th year that Yehu is the king up in the north. So oftentimes you'll see throughout the book of Kings, one king's reign will be marked by another king's reign in the parallel kingdom, as a way of trying to somewhat sync up the chronologies.
And that's very helpful for everyone that comes afterwards.
Well, you'd think so. There's a few places where it's still a little hard to get the count 100% right, but it does help a lot.
And he reigned in Jerusalem 40 years. His mother's name was Zivia of Beersheba. All his days Jehoash did what was pleasing to the Lord, as the priest Jehoiada, instructed him. The shrines, however, were not removed, and the people continued to sacrifice and offer at the shrines.
So yes, we're seeing what this new king is going to be like, and he was fortunate enough to be instructed well by an actual priest of Jehoiada. Sorry, an actual priest of God rather than all of the Baal stuff, and that meant that he had a good start, and he was dedicated to God. The problem, of course, was that although he himself was personally dedicated to God, it didn't work out so well with the rest of the nation. There's kind of a running commentary of all the different kings of whether they themselves do what is pleasing, sort of a thumbs up, and whether or not they make sure the people do what is pleasing, also would be a thumbs up. And you mostly get kings that are like this. They're not good, and they don't make the people do good. Occasionally, you get a king like this, that generally they're good, but they don't make sure the people do well. And that's kind of what we're dealing here. That's kind of what we're dealing with here. Interestingly enough, if you look in Divrei Hayamim, the book of Chronicles, you'll find out that Yehoash didn't always do what was right. That according to the reading after Jehoiada dies, the other people of Judah come and they essentially deify him. Yehoash had taken refuge in the Holy of Holies. He had hid there in order that he not be killed. That's what the restoration we were talking about. And it's kind of like when they come to him and say, well, if you were living there, maybe that means, because no one should be in the Holy of Holies except for the high priest, but that must mean you have some sort of special status. Maybe you're kind of a godlike person yourself. And he kind of listens to them, which is why all of these other activities are still allowed. So he is mostly good for much of his life. But this is not somebody who gets the full stamp of approval.
Yehoash said to the priests, all the money, current money, brought into the house of the Lord is sacred donations. Any money a man may pay as the money equivalent of persons, or any other money that a man may be minded to bring to the house of the Lord, let the priests receive it, each from his benefactor. They in turn shall make repairs in the house, whatever damage may be found. So it's basically saying that the cash that comes in should be used to fix the place up.
Well, there's an important middle component of that. He's saying the cash that comes in should be used to fix the place up, to keep the repairs, but the cash comes in and goes to whoever the priest is, whichever Kohen does the officiation for the ceremony that the person who brought the money in needs, and then that Kohen is responsible for using it for the upkeep of the temple. So there's a very important middle step where the money passes through the hands of the Kohen. Make sense? That's going to be the problem.
Yeah, I can already see the problem there.
Yeah. Yeah. In an ideal world, we would just wrap up the Haftarah there. But as we're going to see in the 23rd year, which means we have to add on 23 years of reign to a 7-year-old, which he's now 30 years old, it's going to be a rather rude awakening.
But in the 23rd year of King Yehoash, it was found that the priests had not made repairs on the house. So King Yehoash summoned the priest Jehoiada and the other priests and said to them, why have you not kept the house in repair? Now do not accept money from your benefactors anymore, but have it donated for the repair of the house. The priests agreed that they would neither accept money from the people nor make repairs on the house. Nor make repairs on the house?
Nor make repairs on the house. So first of all, we have to note the very interesting interpersonal relationship that just happened. So Yehoash was put on the throne by Jehoiada when he was 7 years old. It is now 23 years later, so he's a 30-year-old man now, and he's now summoning Jehoiada to answer for this problem. So he really has grown up. He really is now saying, look, I am the king, and you are the priest, but we need to work this out. And I'm not just that little boy anymore, because I can see there's a problem. And that edict I made when I was 7 isn't working out. So what he's saying is, look, right now, money comes in, it goes to the priest is responsible for fixing. The priest is no longer going to get the money, and the priest will no longer be responsible for fixing. So I'm taking the money and the responsibility out of your hands.
Now, I'm not saying that the priests took the money and used it for personal gain, but I wonder if there were priests who were like, the saltsmans are coming in today, I'll do this one. Because they're always very generous.
But we do get we do get in verse 14 some hints at what they might have been using the money for. And it's not necessarily that they were pocketing the money and just using it for wild vacation parties, but they were not using it for the physical repairs of the building itself. And quite frankly, we see this as a rabbi of a congregation. We see that a lot of people don't see that donating for the physical repairs of a building are exactly glamorous. You want to donate to something fancy, something nice, something that enhances the splash of the ritual. Donating for light bulbs, donating for the cleaning of the carpet. That's not exactly the kind of thing that fires the soul. And what's being worked out here is a way that the money that is needed to make sure the roof stays on will actually be collected, and not everything will go for the flash.
And the priest Jehoiada took a chest and bored a hole in its lid. He placed it at the right hand of the altar as one entered the house of the Lord, and the priestly guards of the threshold deposited there all the money that was brought into the house of the Lord. Whenever they saw that there was much money in the chest, the royal scribe and the high priest would come up and put the money accumulated in the house of the Lord into bags where they would count it. So they've basically into the system of witnesses and professional accountant team to come in and take this deposit now, because no one knew how much was in there until it was literally, you couldn't lift it.
No, that's the whole point of having a locked box with a hole that only goes one way. And to this day, this is the way tzedakah money is handled. The sages of the Talmud are very clear that you always have 2 people who go out collecting the money, and you always have 3 people counting it in order that you can make sure that all the money is properly kept track of. And there are many other regulations to make sure that those that are collecting on behalf of righteous causes are above and beyond reproach, and making sure that they give no hints that anything untoward could be happening. They even go so far as to say you can't make change for a donation from your own wallet, because that still looks wrong, because you took one note or coin and put it into your purse. And even though you're taking out the right number to transfer back, it still just doesn't look right.
Then they would deliver the money that was weighed out to the overseers of the work, who were in charge of the house of the Lord. These, in turn, used to pay the carpenters and the laborers who worked on the house of the Lord, and the masons and the stonecutters. So they basically took the money, weighed it into bags, and then used that to filter down to all the craftspeople that they needed to fix.
Right, and it was paid directly to the actual laborers, the people who did the actual work.
They also paid for wood and for quarried stone, with which to make the repairs of the house of the Lord, and for every other expenditure that had to be made in repairing the house. However, no silver bowls, and we're at the part that you mentioned, I think. No silver bowls, and no snuffers, basins, or trumpets, no vessels of gold or silver were made at the house of the Lord from the money which was brought into the house of the Lord. I think this perfectly illustrates what you were just saying about how people don't want to donate to the light bulbs. Clearly, this money has been used to elevate the aesthetics, and perhaps not the function of the temple. You're just surrounding yourself with gold and trinkets and making everything shiny and beautiful.
Well, I mean, it is what is impressive, even if it isn't always what is essential.
This was given only to the overseers of the work for the repair of the house of the Lord. No check was kept on the men to whom the money was delivered to pay the workers, for they dealt honestly. That kind of feels like a bit of a slap, doesn't it?
It is a great line. Of course, you would think that the Kohanim, the priests, would be the people that you would be able to trust implicitly, but they are too close to the matter. And their judgment has already been proven to not be perfect. Again, I'm not trying to say, and I don't think the text is trying to say that they were engaged in corruption or hanky-panky here. This isn't like money was going to a Swiss bank account. But what they thought the house needed were the things they were using directly. And that was not what the house needed. The house needed plaster repair. The house needed the roof not to leak and needed beams replaced as they got old and rotted. So that was what was essential. And when they got people in charge that knew their business and did it with the proper reverence, you didn't need to be suspicious of them. They would do it. The work would get done. You could see that things were going the way they should.
On TV, and I know I worked nearly 20 years in retail, and often you'd have a visit from your area manager or your district manager, and they'd come into the shop which you'd painstakingly prepared for their arrival, and they'd say, the third light bulb's not bright enough, that sign needs to go slightly to the left, and this isn't in alphabetical order, and I can see some fluff on the end of that table. And you'd be gutted, but because an outsider had come in, they could instantly see the faults, and I imagine it was much the same here. Human error, and like you said, they weren't far enough away for them to see what needed to be done. They just saw what they needed to do every day. The kind of bigger picture maybe wasn't as obvious to them.
And it is very easy in spirituality in general to be attracted to the flashy, the stylish, the exciting, the thing that resonates and stands out the most. But in general, it is the nuts and bolts, the day-to-day mundane spirituality that is most sustaining, and makes room and space for the occasional flash of gold and silver, certainly. But you have to have everything in order for the rest of that to make sense. Many people will often reverse those and will dive straight for what they think are the spiritual highs, the most spiritually exciting experiences, and forget that the day-to-day spirituality of living a life of the commandments has to be the foundation to make those spiritual highs actual highs rather than a substitution for doing what God has actually asked. It's sort of the equivalent of if you're in a marriage, if it's really important to your spouse that you come home on time, you should come home on time and not buy them a diamond necklace every few months. The diamond necklace may be pretty and they may even like it, but what they really would like is for you to come home on time. And that should take your priority. And if you can't get that right, no diamond necklace is going to be a substitute.
17 here is interesting from my perspective, because of the tradition I've come from, where the only form of atonement that was acceptable according to the Christian faith was Jesus' death. And why was that important? Because according to Christianity, Hebrew roots, and the kind of new messianic Christian culture, you need to have blood as an atonement for your sin. But I'm reading here in 17 that money brought as a guilt offering or as a sin offering was not deposited in the house of the Lord. It went to the priests. So maybe you can fill us in a little bit on what that verse means.
Sure. Well, first of all, let's back up with the more general statement about whether or not atonement can be affected by any means other than blood. There are numerous references throughout the works of the prophets, not even to mention rabbinic teachings, that explain quite clearly that the sacrifices were not in and of themselves a vehicle for atonement, that the sacrifices were an expression of the contrition of the person who was seeking atonement. It was not the vehicle in and of itself. That it is the repentance, it is the contrite spirit, it is the willingness to change in order to be living according to the commandments. That was the actual thing that affected atonement. And then the sacrifice was there as a symbol, as a representation of those emotions which obviously can't be seen by the naked eye.
I've heard it called an external sign of an internal change.
That's a very good summary of what I just took 5 sentences to say. Exactly right. Exactly right. And you know, we hear from the prophets over and over again that if you don't feel it, all the blood in the world isn't going to do a thing. That it has to be the internal. And although the Jewish community was devastated by the destruction of the first and second temples, and the loss of the spiritual experience of having that physical gesture of the internal state, the internal state remained the actual vehicle for atonement, and actually allowed for us to continue to live in good harmony with God, without the physical structure itself, which is why, if you imagine it or think through it very carefully, the alternatives, when God destroyed the first temple, how could the people have ever done atonement then in order to earn coming back to the land? It simply would not have been physically possible. When God removes the altar, there should be no way to restore ourselves in God's sight if the blood was the essential ingredient. But as a matter of fact, that's not at all what happened. Instead, the people did atone very, very deeply in the exile of Babylon, and that was one of the key ingredients that led to not just a restoration, but a good restoration that was able to thrive off and on pretty well for a few hundred years. So now let's get back to the verse in question. There's this wonderful idea of the extra money for the asham or the chatat sacrifices that were being brought. So according to Leviticus, according to the laws of the sacrifices, indeed the sacrifice was the animal, and you couldn't just bring cash. And according to rabbinic commentary on this, which I think makes a great deal of sense, when a person knew they needed to bring a sacrifice for one of these types of transgressions, they would designate money to buy the lamb. You know, let's imagine you're not actually a farmer who has a lamb that is fit for a sacrifice, but you're just the guy who makes shoes. You say, okay, I'm going to set aside 5 silver pieces to make an offering in Jerusalem, and I will buy the best lamb I can buy with these 5 silver pieces. And so you go to the lamb market and you find one that's without blemish and perfect, and lo and behold, it only costs 4 silver pieces. Well, what do you do with that extra silver piece, the change? Verse 17 is answering that question, which says you bring the lamb and you bring the change from the money that you had designated as being sanctified, and the lamb goes to the altar and the change goes to the priest. Many of the sacrifices, the remainder of the sacrifice would be given to the priest who had performed it. That was part of their due. It was how they got food, since they didn't have land to provide for themselves. And this money, therefore, as it was attached to the dedicated offering, belonged to the priest. And verse 17 is simply saying that should continue as normal, that the priests were allowed to keep this cash as their normal due, even though the other cash had been taken out of their hands.
Do we know why? What makes this money different to the other money?
Well, the other money that was being brought for the Beit HaMikdash, for the temple itself, whereas this money is being brought for the particular sacrifice. And the particular sacrifice belongs to the particular priest who is offering it. That was simply the way they made it fair. Although there are some stories about how priests divvied up who got to do what sacrifices, but that may be for another podcast. And therefore, what verse 17 is trying to clarify is simply that continued as normal. That it wasn't as though the priests lost all the monies that were coming in. If it was coming with a sacrifice, then it belonged to the priest just as the sacrifice belonged to the priest. If it was coming for the temple, then no longer would it go through the priest's hands to be used for the temple. It would go straight to the lockbox and be handled by this new accounting system.
All right, well, you're done. Okay, so there we are, everyone. That was this week's bonus round. I think I'm going to call them bonus rounds. We don't get to do them. We don't get to do them every week because, well, you know, when they fall, because we don't always have time. But this week we did. So you can do what you want now, actually, because I can't tell you what we're doing next week. That's on a different broadcast, and this probably won't be used again for another how many years. But if you've wandered across it, thanks for watching. That's so funny. It's just like this might not happen again for ages. I don't know.
Well, it's fairly common for Shabbat Shekalim to fall on Mishpatim. They're pretty common partners, but yeah, it's not every year.
All right. So thank you for watching. Thank you, Rabbi Neely, for joining us again.
Thank you, Jason.
And we'll see you all again very soon. Bye-bye.